All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Chris Neidl. I am your very happy host of This is CDR, Open Air's flagship weekly webinar that focuses on introducing our growing audience to really the sort of the faces and brains and hands of the carbon dioxide removal world. We focus a lot on conversations with the leaders and visionaries behind the many carbon dioxide removal startups of all stripes that have popped up around the world in recent years. Occasionally, we have some other subject experts in the areas of science and policy. And we do this every Tuesday. So if you're new to it, Tuesday at 12 Eastern, for the most part. Occasionally, we take off some time. So what I think I would do is just give a quick little introduction to the program and to Open Air, and then we'll go ahead and introduce our amazing guests from Mast, who really excited to speak with today. So again, for those of you who are new, This is CDR is a weekly program put on by the Open Air Collective, an all-volunteer network of carbon dioxide removal enthusiasts, I guess is a way to put it. We've been around since 2018, which is hard to believe. And our members in a volunteer capacity get up to all sorts of different things that aim to elevate and advance carbon dioxide removal. Next week, I will be the guest of this show to speak to advocacy, which is a big piece of what Open Air does. We've been involved in the development, introduction, and advocacy for most of the carbon dioxide removal related legislation at the state level in the US. And so I'll be going over our newest crop of 6 different pieces of legislation that are now live and introduced at the state level. So I'll talk a bit about those, what they do, and how you all can get involved and help making them law. We have really cool couple of projects that are related to sort of maker projects or open source R&D around carbon removal. Hopefully next week I can announce when we'll have one of those projects featured, which is called Epiphyte, which has been around for a couple of years. It's an open source direct air capture machine that we have a team of engineering students at UT Austin building the most recent version of. Do a lot of stuff around education, of which This is CDR is an example, but we do have a lot of different webinars that we do as well as putting together live events in different places, most recently in New York City in December. And then occasionally some of our members get together and hatch ideas around CDR enterprise or business models or support other projects as well. We featured some of these on here most recently, the Naka Valley Biochar Project, which is an amazing project at the Naka Valley refugee settlement in Uganda, where we, over the last few years, have helped stand up an all refugee-led biochar enterprise, which is now thriving, and we'll continue to provide updates on that. Before and if you guys are interested, I'll pop, or when Tank might be joining in a second, my trusted co-host, he's just wrapping up another webinar, but we'll drop some links. If you want to join the community, you can come into our Discord, which is the platform that we hang out and chat on. Now, before I start and introduce our guests from Mast, I do want to just take a moment for a second and recognize and remember Matt Eisenman. Very sad news we learned last week. Matt Eisenman, who is the brain and genius really behind the amazing ocean marine CDR company, Ebb Carbon. The foundations of that product really came from Matt's extensive work as a very notable academic. And Matt passed away all too young, I believe just over a week ago, and we were all very sad to hear that. I was able to meet Matt a few times. He was an early guest on This is CDR before Ebb was even founded. And he's just really that example, I think, of what this sector is so shaped by, that we have just these kind of brilliant scientists who understood that what they had discovered through their research, they had to get it out into the world rather than write just more papers about it, which is valuable. And Matt, to me, was sort of the embodiment of, I think, that feature of our industry. So incredibly sad to lose Matt. His legacy obviously will continue to live on through the amazing team at Ebb Carbon and the huge imprint he made on the carbon dioxide world. So very sorry to Matt and Matt's family and friends. Okay, we'll move on. Let me see if Tank has joined. Again, who is always called the busiest man in carbon removal. There he is, just wrapping up another webinar just in time. And so, Tank, I'll allow you to go ahead and introduce our guests, and we can take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. Tank Kira. I'm an open air volunteer based in Taiwan. Today, we're very excited to welcome Maria and Brady from Mast Reforestation on This is CDR. So a quick intro. Brady is the Director of Carbon Market Partnership at Mast. He brings 15 years of experience developing climate, sustainability, and social impact strategy for global organizations, building and leading cross-geography teams, and executing programs that are grounded in impact. He spent 8.5 years at Shopify, where he built climate programs as part of Shopify's Sustainability Fund and worked with 30 of the most promising carbon removal companies globally. He is based in Toronto, Canada. Maria is the Director of Product Carbon at Mast. She oversees product development, defining guidelines for carbon projects that ensures Mast delivers high-quality carbon credits in collaboration with implementation teams. Maria was previously the Director of Climate Science at the American Forest Foundation, where she led the team and submitted to B0 for what would become the USA's highest-rated IFM project. Her background in GIS, remote sensing, and technology development have ensured deep understanding of much of the data that drives the implementation and credibility. Maria has a Bachelor of Science in Geology and is based in my home province, Nova Scotia, Canada. Welcome.
Thanks for the great intro. Yeah, I spoke with Tank yesterday, actually, and we were talking about Nova Scotia, and I was like, oh, you two are going to connect. Anyways, nice to see you all today, and thank you for having us both. I'm Brady, as you can imagine from my name. We're really excited to share with you a little bit more about our restorative CDR approach at Mast and how we're approaching biomass barrel. So let's get started, I think. So, right, we did these intros, so I'm going to skip this slide. For anyone who doesn't know, Mast is a vertically integrated reforestation company and a carbon project development company. And so we focus on the restoration of post-wildfire lands in particular, exclusively, I should say, mostly in the Western US, and we've explored some work in Canada as well. And so what I mean by vertically integrated is, anything from seed collection to seed processing and storage to sowing and growing seedlings to planning and executing carbon projects and reforestation projects. Mast has the capabilities and is involved along the way. And we've evolved over the years. Many of the folks in this community may have heard of drone seed, which is what Mast was many years ago. In short, we did drone-based planting, reforestation, and treatments of land for a number of years, and we learned a bunch through that. And what I would just say, in brief, is basically drone-based planting takes a lot of seed, and seed is actually a really scarce resource. And so we transitioned to seedling deployment by acquiring 2 nurseries. And so we have 2 nurseries that are part of our family of companies now: Silva Seed, which is a 150-year-old nursery, as well as Cal Forest. And between these 2 nurseries, they're crucial hubs in the U.S. forestry supply chain. Mast now, as a result of these acquisitions, grows the majority of seedlings for the state of California and manages the majority of seed for the Western 11 states. So, and we produce roughly 36 million seedlings annually. So those nurseries have definitely increased our capacity in terms of what we can grow and store for seed, which is fantastic. Just to give you an example of what's on this slide here, of course, on the far left, you'll see this is a historical image of a cone collector from Silva Seed, who was then known as Manning Seed Company, as well as one of our drones that we used for a period of time. We've got a picture here of one of our nurseries, Cal Forest, and then on the right, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today as well, that's a picture of one of our team members doing a soil sampling at a test pit for our first biomass barrel project. So just to contextualize the problem that we are working against, basically forest regeneration is in decline. And so this slide shows that black line, which is wildfire acreage, over about a 10-year average. And as you can see, obviously it's increasing. The orange line is forest regeneration, the rate at which it's regenerating. And you can see that there's a gap there of about 5 million acres per year difference. Hotter fires, larger fires, more intense fires are driving a net loss of forest. And in recent years, an average of 7 million acres have burned annually in the US, which is nearly the size of the state of Maryland every year. And Maria and I are both Canadian, and Tank is also from Nova Scotia. So for a point of reference, that's almost half of Nova Scotia burning each year, which is clearly a lot.
All right. Thanks, Brady, for sharing where Nova Scotia actually is. That's great. So anyway, seed sources are being depleted by this intense wildfire. It's why we're not seeing a lot of that natural regeneration and that gap growing with what Brady shared. And forests lost to severe wildfire struggle to regenerate and need human intervention. We can go to the next slide there, Brady. Oh, there we go. So now that we've got seedling scarcity covered for the most part under Mast projects through our nurseries and vertical integration, the next big challenge with reforestation is actually the funding. Trees grow really slowly in Western North America, and we've found through our reforestation projects that ex post credit generation under ARR protocols doesn't generally start happening until roughly 12 years in, which makes funding really difficult, especially when buyers have 2030 climate goals. And so we took a deeper look at that and realized our biggest expense in reforestation on these landscapes is removing the dead, burnt biomass on the landscape. We remove it because it's a continued fire risk, but also really a work safety risk when it comes to reforestation planting operations. And so we looked at that and said, how can we shift our biggest challenge into credits that can be delivered faster and potentially be more durable? And that leads us to our new solution and why we're all here today. We're focused on biomass burial. We talk about this as our restorative CDR pathway, which combines biomass burial on post-wildfire landscapes with reforestation as a co-benefit. So that's non-credited reforestation on the same property.
So I think one of the things that we're really excited about here is that from a multi-stakeholder perspective, we think that this makes a lot of sense. Biomass burial on post-wildfire lands. For landowners, often there are not many options, if any other options, for restoring the land. As well as Maria said, burnt dead trees or logs are future fire risk. The other thing is that landowners want to see their land restored. Often people have an emotional connection to their forest. And we've heard firsthand from landowners that watching it burn is devastating. And so you want to see that land restored, as well as the ecosystem services that are associated with that, including water management and the impacts on soil and carbon sequestration, as well as things like migration pathways and regenerating the habitat for plants and animals as well. From a carbon buyer perspective, one of the things that we're really excited about, and we're hearing really great positive feedback from buyers on right now, is that our approach generates a durable carbon credit on a shorter timeline, so a 6 to 12 month timeline, which is great for buyers who want to retire these credits soon. Plus, as Maria said, there's no non-credited reforestation as well, which is something that we're hearing is definitely interesting to corporations in North America in particular, which is supporting the restoration of forests in North America. The other thing I'll mention is the price point is comparable to other scalable CDR pathways. So it's less expensive than several leading companies, I would say right now, and comparable to biochar as well. And then finally, from a project developer perspective, so from our perspective, as Maria said, it addresses two major challenges to restoring land, financing and also dealing with the biomass post-wildfire, which we have to clear some of that if we're going to restore the land anyways. And again, credits generate faster, which means that from our perspective, running a business and trying to fund these projects, we can generate revenue faster, which allows us to do this whole process quicker. So it turns a cost center into a revenue opportunity for us as well. So, if you picture a post-wildfire landscape, you would probably picture something like this. It's pretty stark. It's a bunch of dead, burned trees. This is recent after a fire. You can see smoke in the air still. And it's pretty bleak. It's devastating to see this. And this is what the post-wildfire landscapes look like. They're certainly not easy landscapes to see, but also to operate in. One of the things you'll notice as well, or you could imagine, is that there are lots of dead standing trees and also dead trees that are burned on the ground as well. And so for our projects on post-wildfire landscapes, that's the biomass that we're using and we're burying. And so I'm going to pass it to Maria, and she can tell all of you a little bit more about how we approach this work specifically after forest fires.
Sure. Thanks, Brady. This is an inherently simple solution of we're going to bury these logs, but there's lots of detailed science and engineering behind it. And so I want to talk a little bit about the steps that we go through. First thing is that we're taking the dead woody biomass from the same property that we're burying it on and moving it into engineered chambers. So we're not moving it very far. We work with reputable global engineering firms to with decades of experience engineering similar designs for landfills. And we're designing these chambers to ensure anoxic and very low humidity conditions to ensure that we're stopping any decomposition of the wood and assure that durability. Our designs also include generally low permeability clay-rich soils around the chamber, and we also add layers to the cap designs of the top cover that are specifically designed to prevent any water intrusion and offer the benefit of diffusion of any potential emissions leakage if there does happen to be any decomposition. After implementing the engineered designs and capping the chamber, Mast installs monitoring equipment to watch for any signs of that decomposition mentioned, specifically using gas sensors to monitor for any GHG emissions, and really assuring ongoing durability of the project. But we also can detect for any early indication of risk reversal, so we can address it right off the bat as soon as we see it. And then finally, we are really focused on restoring the land. That's really core to Mast's mission and a lot of what drives staff at Mast. And so we do that in a number of different ways with these particular projects. First, we plant native grass seeding on the project site specifically. That's really typical of the savanna ecosystem on these properties. And then we're restoring the land where the fire-killed trees were removed from. We do that via partnering with communities to collect the native seed, growing those seedlings in our nurseries, and then designing planting prescriptions that are specific to future fire resilience and ecosystem benefits.
So this is our first biomass burial and reforestation project. It's called Mast Wood Preserve MT1. As far as we know, this is a market first opportunity in what we call restorative carbon removal, which combines biomass burial and reforestation, like we've said. Phase 1 of the project will generate 5,000 corks or carbon dioxide removal credits, which will be ready for retirement by corporate buyers or other buyers by February 2026. But it will actually generate up to 30,000 corks by the end of 2026, depending on how we phase that out. And as Maria said, the corks are generated through the on-site burial of unmerchantable trees. So they've been destroyed by wildfire. That is the biomass that we use in this project. And then it still supports reforestation. So in this case, this project will support around 300 acres of reforestation as well. And we're also excited to share that phase one, we've received an ex-ante B0 rating as well for the phase one of the project, which we're going to share more about publicly as soon as we can, which we think will be very soon. But Mast is this project is located in Montana. So we're working with a family landowner outside of Billings, Montana, to restore areas that were affected by the July 2021 Poverty Flats fires, or fire, I should say. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to round things out a little bit with our just accounting principles. I think that's everyone's favorite topic in CDR, I'm sure. So starting off with our counterfactual, we're working with a couple different counterfactuals with biomass burial. Typically in these landscapes and with this project type, the counterfactual would be that the woody biomass is left on the landscape to decompose or be a fuel for future wildfires. And we'd associate that with the local fire intervals. In our case, with our current projects, it's a little bit different. So far, when we've showed up, the landowners have already cleared most of the wood, if not all of the wood, and piled it with intent to burn within the year. This behavior is associated with lots of grants being available to landowners to clear the dead wood post fires, with recommendations that come along with that to pile burn it. And we've recognized pile burning as kind of a business as usual case and witnessed it happening for a number of reasons. First, it's generally a really big eyesore on these folks' beautiful properties. Second, it continues to be a fuel risk even after it's piled. And third, it's the cheapest option to get rid of this biomass at scale. And so we show up, we offer to bury it with the opportunity for reforestation in exchange with the landowner, which helps the landowner get their forest back, but also conveniently brings some serious co-benefits for our buyers. Now onto monitor or MRV. I guess I don't need to say the full bit here with this audience. Mast is setting up a permanence foundation as a third-party entity. That foundation will be legally responsible for all MRV for the full 100-year commitment period associated with this project. And that through the MRV, we're watching for any unanticipated emission leakage. This entity will be responsible for reporting to Puro Earth, which is our chosen standard, and any associated buyers. And that permanence foundation mentioned on the previous slide is also going to be funded with an endowment that will fund any associated remediation of the chamber's integrity. So if there's any animal intrusion or unanticipated settling, we know things happen. And so we want to make sure that we're ensuring durability even in those events. And any unexpected emissions detected during the MRV will indicate that there will be a need to go look what's happening, remediate. But also we're using it as a bit of a financial buffer pool or insurance mechanism. And so there is the ability to compensate for any emissions detected in MRV as well. And then finally, Mast also secures the burial site with legally binding easements and subsurface use agreements. And that's to ensure all parties are committed to durability for the duration of the project. And this will be my last topic, I think. I want to address best use of biomass specifically. I know it's a hot topic in the market related to biomass burial in particular. And I just want to highlight, like, Mast really deeply considered alternatives for this biomass. And we wanted to choose the best opportunity for both climate impact, the landowners, for us, for buyers. And so the first is lumber. The closest mill to our project so far is like more than 200 miles away. And so it's really hard to get any of this biomass to mills. But even if there were mills closer, we see in wildfire burn landscapes, mills often get really overwhelmed really quickly with burned wood. And so they end up stopping accepting it. The other thing is that wood deteriorates in a matter of months post-burn. And so it's no longer suitable really quickly. And so that combination makes this use particularly difficult. And the next one is biochar and BiCRS. We deeply considered this one, as you can all imagine. And unfortunately, like mills, there's limited facilities close to these rural projects. And so that wasn't really an option for us. We looked into mobile units for biochar in particular, and we're really excited about the potential there, but found that the re-emission accounting with mobile units is really difficult, and it leaves a lot of uncertainty. And during research, we've witnessed really broad ranges of re-emission factors associated with these mobile units. And so we didn't feel comfortable estimating that within kind of the accounting of our projects. So we're continuing to look into this, but kind of ran into a roadblock there. And then finally, firewood was also considered. Basically, our landowners told us if there was an opportunity to sell this biomass as firewood, they would have. But it turns out that there wasn't. And so we truly believe that biomass burial is the best option for this biomass on these projects, both from an operations standpoint, but also from a climate impact standpoint, because we remove close to 100% of the carbon stored in this biomass. As we look at new locations and new projects, this is always a question that we have in the back of our mind, and we'll continue to look at different opportunities and the best use. And I think that wraps it up for me.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So I think maybe just to sort of summarize, and then excited to chat more with Chris and Tank and everyone who's tuning in today. We think that, and our thesis is that on post-wildfire lands, biomass burial is a really excellent way to sequester more carbon, while also creating a new funding opportunity to support the restoration of forests in North America. And we think that this pathway is a pretty exciting way to do this. So I guess the last thing I would say is, because one of my role at Mast is to connect our projects with corporate buyers, I will just reiterate that if any of you are looking to make purchases, we will have 5,000 tons available from this project, available to retire by February 2026, and up to 30,000 tons available by the end of 2026. And we have intent to scale further as well. So I think we can leave it at that, and looking forward to chatting more with you all for sure.
Sorry about that. Rookie mistake. That was excellent. Really, really well presented. Really exciting. Man, biomass burial is such a simple and exciting solution that it's kind of interesting that it emerged relatively kind of late in the conversations around CDR, given the simplicity and clear advantages that you laid out really, really well. So really interested to hear it. Well, we'll get into, I'll just quickly, Tank, put that down there. If anybody has any questions, comments, illuminating things they want to share, please do put them in the comments, and we're just going to fold them right into the conversation. But let's go ahead and start with just kind of a really, really key question here, which you touched on, but I wonder if you could go a little bit more into depth, is around the durability question in MRV. And I think when a lot of people visualize this and they're new to it, that simplicity of it, they're like, well, doesn't there have to be a certain level of complexity around making sure that that carbon is going to stay underground and that we can monitor it? So you had mentioned the sort of the clay liners, and then you talked about the gas sensors. I know you guys aren't on the tech side of the team, but I was wondering if you could fill in a little bit more detail on what that looks like, because I think that is a key question that many people have about this pathway.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to dive into that. And thank you for recognizing I'm not the technical expert here. But I will say, if the chamber design that we've built out is implemented appropriately, we would expect to actually not see any decomposition or greenhouse gas emission associated with that. And so that's what we're really watching for with these gas sensors. We also work with our engineering firms to decide on which kinds of sensors that we want to install and check on. We haven't finalized our decision on exactly what type of sensor we plan on using. But so far, I think we're planning to do discrete monitoring. And so having someone go out for the first every 6 months to check the readings and compile that in our documentation to report to Bureau and to buyers is kind of the plan at this point. Does that cover what you're
Yeah, that's good. And it probably eliminates the need to go into the depth on Matan's question, which is quite technical. It sounds like you'll be figuring out the sort of the powering of the sensors and how they're distributed. But that's definitely a good answer. Just a couple of questions I had around, particularly the sort of partner acquisition side. I think that's probably a better word than kind of customer acquisition. You talk about the project you have in Montana, and this is a solution that resonates. I work a lot in the Western states in Boulder and, Arizona, where this is top of mind for people as like a fundamental safety, quality of life sort of issue, the forest fire mitigation. So I could see private partners like private landholders, but are you hearing from a lot of municipalities and other jurisdictions about partnership that's being led through local governments for what you're offering? Because it seems like that's a really good fit.
Yeah, great question. From everything I know at this point, and Maria, feel free to jump in here, of course. I would say not a ton. We've definitely explored like working on public lands and with public partners. And I think as we continue to explore and define our roadmap to, whatever appropriate scale makes sense based on what's next for us, I think that's definitely something we would continue to explore. Right now, our focus definitely is private landowners. And we have an originations team who works in the Western states and spends a lot of time in communities talking with folks to figure out what's been happening post wildfire and who may be interested, et cetera. So, but it's a great question and something that we'll continue to explore.
Yeah, definitely. Let's be in touch on that. We did a grant round last year with Four Corners, which I direct, which was liability, biomass, and CDR. And one of the grantees was a biomass burial. But I could tell you there's definitely a market, and those local governments, if they get behind it, can really push things in really interesting ways. So
yeah,
let's definitely chat about that. I think it's probably a great opportunity for you guys. Great New York Times piece. Wink, wink, Brady. A really good article that came out from the Times on what you guys did. And in that article, Tank, I think I have a link for it in our brief there if you want to drop the link to that. I think I did actually above. But you highlighted with wildfire restoration that there's some supply chain bottlenecks in the forestry sector. You touched upon that a bit in your presentation, but I'm wondering from like a policy change at any level or infrastructure investments, is there anything that could be done that would help really accelerate post-wildfire reforestation or burial in the U.S.?
Great question again. Yeah. And the New York Times piece was before my time at Mast, but I agree it was a great piece. I think the first thing I would say is like, generally, we need to figure out more scalable financing methods for restoration of forests in North America. And you could have all the seeds and all the seedlings in the world, but we need to figure out a way to pay for that, right? And restoration efforts are very expensive. And the reality, I would say, also is that the market price for nature-based solutions right now is probably too low. I know others like Diego at Pachama and Julia at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development have also beat this drum as well. So I think from our vantage point, anything we can do to include restoration efforts, reforestation efforts, and specific to what we're working on right now, the inclusion of biomass burial on post-wildfire lands in policy that's related to CDR, whether that's tax incentives or tax credits or other policy, is beneficial for sure. And the voluntary market is still voluntary. So as much as we can motivate buyers with additional policy that either makes the cost more palatable or builds CDR into existing infrastructure or existing industry purchase pathways, the better. So from our vantage point, also, we'll continue to advocate for the Carbon Dioxide Investment Act, which is a bipartisan bill that, Chris, I'm sure you know well, which is a technology agnostic or technology neutral tax credit. It also looks like, actually, Jason Grillo at Air Miners just shared this with me, that the California Senate Bill 88 has potential for inclusion of biomass burial as well. So for us, those are two specific examples, but there's definitely lots of room for reforestation and biomass burial and a more broad policy landscape for sure.
Yeah, we're always looking for those opportunities where CDR, in a very credible, well-defined, clear way, sits within other objectives that are sort of higher on the priority list. And I think biomass burial is really one of those ones that, particularly at this very moment, you could just see it really sort of catching, the other policies that are around forest fire mitigation in a whole host of ways, which is really exciting for you guys. I think, one of the things that's also, again, on the simplicity, I mean, I know it's not simple. You have to we all know anytime you're trying to account for carbon being taken out of the air, that necessarily introduces some complexity, as it should. But one of the things I think that's really appealing about this is the nature of sort of workforce development and mobilization, and the possibility where you guys bring in methodologies around how to do it, but then how to account for it and connect it to buyers. But do you look at working with, not in sort of a franchisee way, but local kind of companies or, communities where they can kind of almost be the boots on the ground that are sort of leading the actual, identifying the land, doing the actual project, and then the O&M afterward? It seems like there's a pretty amazing opportunity in that regard, that it could, you could have a lot of partners and a lot of jobs created locally.
Yeah, I can take the start of that, and Brady, feel free to fill in too. We do partner locally quite a bit. We've got a few folks sprinkled throughout our project areas, but we really do rely on local contracting for any kind of implementation. We also work with consulting foresters who already have clients to generate leads if there's landowners looking for this kind of opportunity too. So we both rely on local economies and local support, but also do our best to bring any money that we're generating in the carbon market to also benefit those local economies.
That's great. We should talk again. There's some kind of spots that have popped up on my map that might be a good fit for you guys, so we can chat about that. I have other questions too, but Tank, I'm curious if you have, and then we do have a couple of good questions that have popped in, kind of on the technical side, but we should raise them from Matan again and from Mark. So if you want to take one of those, if you have any questions first, Tank.
I think, my question would be sort of along the line what Mark asked is, you were talking about the chambers. Can you describe what that sort of look like and what that looks like, and why do you use them? Is it necessary? Mark asked, and how do you take into account the energy needed to dig and bury the large logs compared to the sequestration of the biomass?
Yeah, so great questions. First, I want to say the use of the term chamber is actually pulled from the Paron methodology. It's like potentially a fancy word for a hole that we cover. So in terms of like all the engineering that we're putting into this chamber, because we're doing our first project, we are potentially like over engineering the hole to make sure that we're ensuring durability right off the bat. And so we're taking kind of every conservative approach that we can to make sure that we're stopping any decomposition right off the bat. And then the other question around energy needed to dig and bury large logs, that's something I should have put in the presentation. It's such a important question, and an important part of our accounting. We do a life cycle analysis of all of the emissions associated with our implementation process. We do an early one where we used estimate kind of standardized numbers associated with machine hours. And so far, it's resulting in like roughly 1% of the total carbon removed in the project. Of course, like when we're actually implementing the project, we'll keep all of our receipts and do proper kind of ex post accounting associated with those emissions to properly discount our total carbon numbers.
Can you give us a sense of where the boundary lies, in the LCA cycle?
I'm not an LCA expert, to be honest. I do know that it is like anything that happens on the property, those emissions are accounted for. I'm not sure kind of how much further it goes. Yeah, but luckily we're taking wood from kind of 200 meters away on the same property and putting it in our chambers.
Yeah.
Do you want to do the Matan one, or do we think that was covered, but we can pop that one up?
Yeah, I would think that's covered. Yes, quantifying the amount of carbon. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So how do you quantify the amount of carbon in the, I guess this question is about in the biomass itself that you're burying? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another thing I should have put in the presentation in the accounting section. I'll get better as I go at this. But we bring out scales. So basically the big like truck scales, and we weigh all of the wood before we bury it. We also take moisture samples from those logs to get kind of average moisture across the piles. I am not the expert to tell you how exactly that is converted to total carbon, but I do know we have a team full of experts that are really focused on that.
Gotcha. Well, we'll have please folks keep the questions coming. I had a couple of other ones too. One is, I mean, again, when you think about what the proposition is here that you're putting forward to a landowner or a local place, it's incredibly enticing where the carbon removal is almost sort of hidden to a certain degree as the co-benefit, not hidden, but maybe a back seat to some of the more immediate advantages of it. The project that you're working on in Montana, and you have other ones, I would love to just get some insight into what you're picking up from that partner in terms of the kinds of like enthusiasm they're having, but also the initial questions, because it feels like that's a big part of the story is what the landowner is going to be getting out of this. So I didn't know if you had any anecdotes or anything to share about your partner in Montana or in any of the other work in terms of who they are and what they're looking to get out of this.
I mean, I can speak to the enthusiasm, and we were lucky that GreenBiz was in Phoenix, Arizona earlier this year, and it happens that one of the landowners' family members is also based close by, and so we were able to get together and have dinner, which was wonderful. And so we could hear from them directly, not just our originations team working with them and some folks who were close to the project development in the early stages, but also Maria and myself and some other folks on our commercial partnerships team, et cetera. And they're really excited. They showed us pictures of the fire burning and could talk about the devastation of that and the concern, both for the landowner themselves, but also the landscape. But are really, really excited about getting this project going and seeing the trees in the ground in particular, and seeing the land restored. So I hope I'm capturing that sentiment right and not, misparaphrasing any of that. But from everything I can tell from the landowners, they're very, very excited for sure. And Maria, I don't know if you have insight into any of the early questions. I don't really know what those would have been to any depth, at least.
Yeah, it's hard because I also wasn't there for a lot of those questions. But I do know that like landowners want to deeply understand what is going to happen and why people are paying for us to bury wood on their land. And so kind of bringing them along on that journey of understanding what a durable CDR credit is always part of it. But we also talk a lot about what their land's going to look like afterward. So they don't necessarily want like big fences and like a huge mound where it shouldn't be, or anything like that. And so we work with landowners to figure out kind of where their boundaries are around like where we can implement it on the property. We make sure that we're not like tearing up the fields in the spring when the ground is soft, things like that. So it's an ongoing conversation with the landowner from the very beginning all the way through to implementation.
But I would say, Chris, like your point of the carbon removal almost being secondary, I think, at least from what I've sort of heard, is relevant and true, which is like my understanding is that there's more excitement about the restoration, right, versus the carbon removal. Again, I don't know. I don't want to misquote that, but that's sort of the sentiment that I'm reading.
Yeah, I would imagine. And then the carbon part is the sort of the stream that funds it, essentially.
Yeah, it's like the mechanism. Yeah.
Well, we've got some really good questions. Harold, which I'll let before we get to Harold and Peter. Harold, we've already sort of touched on that, but maybe we can go into a little more depth. But just to clarify one thing too, my understanding of it with some of the other companies I've talked to, this is really kind of a northern latitude solution by and large because of the temperature stuff, right? Is in terms of the durability is somewhat linked to cold weather climates and just the nature of forest growth. Is that fair to say? This is kind of a Canada, northern US, and then in Europe comparable, or is there scope for this in lower latitudes?
Yeah, I think there's definitely scope for this in lower latitudes. I've seen on, I think, CDR FYI that there are plenty of projects more southern to us. I would say the temperature of the chamber or the vault is a factor in decomposition and something that we kind of have to pay close attention to in how we're designing the chamber itself. But I wouldn't say it's a limiting factor. Because there's other kind of aspects that can be controlled around how wet it is, making sure it's anoxic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I bring it up just we have COP30 coming up at the end of this year in Brazil. This will be a major conference of parties, and forests, as you would imagine, are very, very much on the agenda. So it is interesting to know about how portable of a solution this is in different contexts, particularly as we get closer to the equator. We have a couple other questions here. You want to take those, Tank?
Yeah, I'll go to Harold's question first. So the net carbon impact of burying timber versus transporting it for processing, I guess, is comparing to the other scenarios that you were looking at potentially for, either biochar or for sort of lumber use.
Okay.
Yeah, how big of a net difference would there be?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I don't think I've heard it phrased this way. Typically, we see the limiting factor being financial. So even when you get to 100 miles distance from a facility, like that's when it starts to be pretty difficult to transport this amount of biomass and get any kind of return to make it worth it. And so yeah, usually we just kind of stop at it's not financially feasible rather than the overarching carbon impact.
Gotcha.
Makes sense. Yes. And the other, Peter also had a question that you were talking about seedings, drone seedings, as opposed. What percentage of the seedings survive? Sure.
Yeah,
This Brady and right, the tree planting in British Columbia, which I went to UBC, and that was always the question.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
Question: all my friends were tree planters and the seedling survival rate. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. That's like a Canadian rite of passage.
Yeah, exactly.
My understanding is we look for like 80 to 90% take rate kind of thing. But Maria, you spent a lot more time in reforestation, maybe you know.
Yeah, all I remember is that I was very impressed with survivability rates at Mast when I joined. So, yeah, I don't have a better answer.
All right. I have a couple other questions too, unless we had any other ones pop up there. Surprise, surprise, I will be talking about this next week, but just the role of policy, I would say, we are getting to a point where we expect to see real integration of carbon removal within net zero, both at the state and national level, and then various different forms of demand support for that, whether it's part of, various cap and trades or through procurement programs, other things like that. But I'm just curious how you see some of the opportunities and challenges around government intervention on the demand side. Right now, you have a very desirable voluntary market product, I would say, which I could see that checks a lot of boxes for buyers there. But what are you expecting? What are you needing from the role of government, whether it's national or subnational, in terms of really making this market flourish for your product?
This is a phenomenal question. So when I look at the market, I think we've seen a strong showing of sort of like, I think what some other folks have described as like a phase one of buyers who are the more catalytic buyers, high volume buyers. We know those names, Shopify, Stripe, Frontier, Microsoft, etc. By no means to diminish any of them by saying etc. They're all incredibly important at this stage. We definitely need to see a new tranche of buyers enter the market, and we need to figure out the mechanism to do that. My view is that one of the mechanisms to do that is to see more government procurement programs that can positively impact the perception of risk in purchasing CDR. And so de-risking the market for corporate buyers, but also having corporate buyers, just like Meta and Google did with the DOE purchase prize, commit to meeting either the same purchase amount or just contributing as well. I think that like government plus private commitment is really powerful and important. Canada has a program for this. The Greening Government Strategy in Canada has a low carbon fuel procurement program, which is including CDR, thanks to a lot of the work that Carbon Removal Canada did, advocating with the government. And so that's very exciting. I think what the reaction was, although that's very exciting, is that it's still too small. And the other thing I would say is, in the absence of or rather with some of the programs of the DOE changing and being shut down, it would be really great to see a global coalition of government buyers doing this. So not just necessarily a single government doing this in their own jurisdiction, but working across countries, and again, trying to activate corporate buyers in those jurisdictions. I would really love to see that. I think that'd be really impactful. And then the other thing I would just say to add to that is like, folks like the Air Miners team and are building carbon buyers groups to try and again activate and corporate buyers and like reduce the barriers to getting more buyers into this space. We don't necessarily need to have the largest volume buyers enter this space right now, although we do need that as well. There is a role for that type of buyer in this market, and it needs to continue. We definitely need to have more buyers enter the space and then continue to increase and scale their contributions and their purchases over time. But we definitely want to see more buyers dip their toe in. And I think government procurement can play a huge role in de-risking that for sure. That's my strong view, as you could tell. But
yeah, I share it. And, there's a very notable figure in carbon removal who is working on that very thing about sort of a international collaboration of sort of a joint AMC or procurement strategy. And I can't remember how public that is at this point, but we'll aim to have him on in the future. California, as I may have told you about, we'll be talking about this next week. There's a really exciting bill that's been introduced by a very powerful and effective senator. That's a CDR procurement bill. It's a pilot, but an $80 million pilot, which just through the process of doing that, as you mentioned, it allows for a lot of transparency about why are we selecting these forms of CDR, and adding in other co-benefits and community factors into the decision-making process. I can see your kind of solution very appealing in the state of California for obvious reasons for both climate and fire risk. So that's a really good point. Well, I think we're just reaching time. Any final thoughts you want to say? I mean, this is so we say, where do you want to be in 5 years? But man, this is such a weird space that it's almost total crystal ball territory for saying that. But anything you want to leave us with about what you're most excited about beyond getting this project certified in Montana? What's on the horizon for Mast?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're, of course, as you just said, we're very excited to get this pilot project off the ground. We're really excited to connect this pilot project to buyers, which every CDR company needs to validate. We need market validation of our approach, and then we want to scale that. And so I think that those are the givens for us. We want to do all those things, and we want to reach good scale in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years for removals. What I'm most excited about is the reaction that we're getting in conversation from potential buyers when we're at conferences or explaining our solution to them. We're getting really positive feedback about the new mechanism to fund and finance reforestation, number one, and decoupling carbon credits from reforestation. I'm not saying that's a bad thing by any means. I think that's a great approach as well in certain climates, et cetera. But we're getting a lot of positive feedback about not crediting the reforestation, but rather crediting the biomass barrel and using that to still restore ecosystems. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's a really innovative model. And, I've said to a few other folks in conversation, like, I did work on the buy side as well at Shopify and was able to see a lot of solutions. And from everything I can tell, this is really innovative and nothing quite like it in the market. And so that's very exciting for me, for sure, on this side.
Keep me posted on that, Brady. That is really, really interesting, that part.
Yeah. Maria, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I love that sentiment, like just focusing on this like new product being kind of like an engineered CDR with like really great durability, but with all the benefits of natural climate solutions. Like, I think we're just so thrilled to tell our story, and I can't wait to get this wood in the ground and have our bio secured and just start scaling, because I really believe in this, and just really excited generally.
Well, you're invited back anytime to continue telling your story. You're at a really exciting moment here, and we've gotten pretty good at that. We have some return guests coming up, but please absolutely keep us posted and let us know any way we can amplify your successes, because what you're doing is very important, and I think the time has really come for Mast's brand of solution. So thank you guys for joining. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and quickly give a little bit of just some updates on some stuff coming up. One thing I really want to stress to people, I should have mentioned it at the beginning, but we have the Carbon Removal Challenge is coming up in May. I say this about a lot of open air projects, but this is absolutely one that is very near and dear to my heart. It is just this incredible challenge for university teams all around the world to introduce the world to their own innovations related to carbon dioxide removal. And every year we pick, I don't know what we're aiming for this year. It might be as many as 10 teams from around the world. This is the third one. It's done in conjunction with Carbon Unbound in New York City, which will be in May. So right now we're raising the funds right now to make sure that we could bring those teams to New York. They get an enormous amount out of it, but it's just an amazing project that I get to MC every year. I put the link there. There's a great video from last year that really captures, I think, the essence of it. So please do contribute if you're feeling generous. Every amount helps. And then I will also just quickly tell you about next week. We got really excited about this. This is certainly an idea that is very near to Open Air's whole theory of the case. And this is about applying open source development models to some of the most challenging MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification challenges that we have for carbon removal. And this idea, if you build a big open community of people that are focused on this, could we come up with better more faster evolving ways to deal with MRV than we otherwise would if it's just done, by sort of centralized companies that do that. So this will be really interesting. It's with Open Carbon Protocol, which is a project of oneshot.earth. So really looking forward to having the team come and contribute. This might be of interest to both Maria and Brady as well. And then we'll have some more of these announced. But the week after that, I'm going to come and give my sort of barnstormer of a review of the different bills that are popping up on the city level that Open Air is involved in. And there's quite a few right now, and some really exciting ones in terms of just really seeing the growing level of ambition and impact in those bills. So really looking forward to covering that with everybody, and hopefully recruiting some of you guys to be involved in our effort to make them law. So with that, I will go ahead and say goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you next week. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.